Hi Asia,
Hey, Flossie.
how are you doing?
Yeah, good. How are you?
Good, thank you. Thanks for joining us, and thanks to everybody watching for joining us this morning in the UK or this evening in Australia. Today we have Asia with us. She is from Project Manta Australia, so she's been researching the Australian manta rays and also doing her PhD on the Aussie mantas and a little bit on the Maldivian mantas. Is that right?
Yeah, a little bit of a mix. It's spanned a little bit outside of Aussie waters, but mostly is still in Aussie waters.
Yeah, I met Asia when she came out to Maldives to do her research. So we had some fun times on the research boat.
Yeah, it was
Um,
awesome.
yeah, so for anyone who hasn't watched before, just before Asia starts her talk, I'll just tell you the technical information. Asia is going to talk for about 20 minutes about the Australian mantas, and then we will take questions. So, as audience members, your audio and video is automatically switched off, but we'd love to hear from you. So, if you have any comments or any questions at any time, please put them in the Q&A box, which is on the Zoom toolbar, and we'll get through as many as we can at the end of the talk. Um, as of next Monday, which is Jamie's webinar about Thai mantas, we will be making the webinars registration only. So all you need to do differently is just go to the website, click on the link as always, and just pop in your name and email address for each webinar. They're still free. You just need to register if you're going to be watching any future webinars. Okay, over to you, Asia.
Thanks, Flossie. Okay, I'll just share my screen.
Perfect.
Are you seeing that? Yep.
Yeah, looks great. All good.
Perfect. Okay, so I guess I'll just, oh, this isn't. I'm going to apologise in advance while this is loading. My internet is down today, so I'm hotspotting, and I hope that we don't have any glitches. But yeah, if I freeze, it is probably my fault. So just a little bit of background about Project Manta. We are a multidisciplinary research group. We're based out of the University of Queensland and the University of the Sunshine Coast, with researchers at Murdoch University and Deakin Universities as well. And Project Manta started on the East Coast in 2007 by a team of academics led by Dr. Kathy Townsend. And in 2014, we actually combined forces with researchers on the West Coast as well to establish national coverage and provide a broader understanding of manta rays around our whole island continent. So my involvement with the project started back in 2013, and I joined the team to look after the East Coast database of sightings and their citizen science outreach. And then I went on to do my honours with the team and am now in the middle of my PhD, as Flossie mentioned. So today I'll cover a little bit of background about the animals in Australian waters, including some of the preliminary results from my PhD. And then I'll also share some cool case studies from our research in Australian waters. So first, I'll just introduce us to this group of animals in case anyone is unfamiliar. Most of the people watching probably already know all about them, but I'll just give a little bit of background to set the scene. So this is one of the questions we often get asked when researching these animals in this country. And as most of you likely know, the answer is no. A manta ray did not kill Steve Irwin, but they are part of the same bigger group of animals known as the chondrichthyans, which include the sharks, the rays, chimeras, and otherwise known as the cartilaginous fishes. They don't have any bones, their skeletons are comprised of cartilage. And the distinction between the bottom-dwelling rays like the stingrays and the more open water counterparts like the manta rays are worth discussing briefly just because they do have important ramifications for the ecology of these animals. So stingrays are more bottom-dwelling. They spend their time on the benthos. They breathe through spiracles on their head, and they have a barb for defense. Whereas manta rays are more open water pelagic animals, so they swim to ventilate their gills, and they don't have a barb. They rely on their speed and their size for defense. And mantas are part of the family Mobulidae. So this includes the mobula or devil rays. And just to confuse you, one of the devil ray species does actually have a barb. But this group has recently undergone some taxonomic revision. So I'm going to be a little bit careful when I say how many species are found in Australian waters. I'll err on the side of caution and say 4 to 5 species of the smaller mobula or devil rays are found in Australian waters, and really little is known about them here. So today we're just going to be focusing on the manta rays. So the 2 species of interest are the oceanic manta ray, Mobula birostris, and the reef manta ray, Mobula alfredi. So they have some key visual characteristics that researchers can use to distinguish them, their size being one. So birostris can grow to over 7 metres from wingtip to wingtip, whereas alfredi goes up to about 5 metres. And their dorsal and ventral markings can also be used to tell them apart. So oceanic manta rays have the prominent white shoulder bars that you can see there on their back, whereas reef manta rays have the less distinct heart-shaped shading. And on their bellies, reef manta rays often have spot patterns between the gills, as this one's an example of, but this is rarely observed in giant manta rays. So around the Australian coastline, giant manta rays are very rarely sighted. Little is known about their distribution, their habitat preferences. We just are very data deficient for this species. Whereas reef manta rays are commonly sighted, they're quite well studied here, and with many of their key aggregation sites quite accessible to divers and snorkelers, and importantly to us researchers. So a little bit about what we've found so far. Now, one of the challenges with understanding animal distribution in Australian waters comes from our vast and unpopulated coastline. So just the Australian mainland is 35,000 kilometres around. So we just don't have the resources to be investigating the whole area. So we have a fairly good understanding of where they are at and around key aggregation sites on each coastline from our research efforts, but also from citizen science contributions. But we've actually relied on some non-traditional methods to fill in the gaps. So enter our PhD student, Amelia Armstrong, who actually compiled all these sightings from internet blogs, YouTube, Facebook, and as well as mining government reports, aerial surveys, all to confirm that their distribution actually extends the full way around the northern stretch of the Australian coastline, and then down the sides of each coastline to around 30 degrees latitude. So you can see on the map here, the colours that are leaning towards orange, that's where our well surveyed areas are, that's where the high sightings are. And then the purples and blue are where there's much lower sightings, and that's where the less traditional methods have been used to confirm their presence there. So those colours are all for the reef manta rays, and then the black circles are the few confirmed sightings of oceanic manta rays. So as you can see from this map, there's very, very few oceanics. They do tend to go down into the temperate waters, whereas the reef manta rays are more constrained to the tropical and subtropical waters. But we do actually update this information all the time. So this photo was sent to us just earlier this month from a SharkSafe drone, and this was off the coast of Merimbula, which is right down south on the Victoria-New South Wales border, about 900 kilometres south of our previous confirmed sighting on the east coast. So it's really interesting to get this information and update our understanding all the time, whether it's updating our understanding of the animal's thermal capacity, or actually this might be representing a bit of a range shift for the species with a change in climate, because we do know that we're getting more warm water incursion further south each year, and the animals are likely exploiting that and moving further south. So we have well-established photo ID databases on both the east and west coasts of Australia for reef manta rays. And we've also got a small database from the Cocos-Keeling Islands, which is an Australian territory in the Indian Ocean. So I'll just go into a bit of detail about the east and west coast databases. So the East Coast database was started around 2007, and a lot of the early work that was put into it was undertaken by Dr. Lydia Couturier during her PhD. We now have almost 1,400 individuals that are being catalogued, with over 7,500 sightings confirmed by photo ID. And the database spans from about the mid New South Wales coast all the way up to far north Queensland. And then for the West Coast, the work there is all about Fraser McGregor. So he actually started his PhD probably about a decade ago, but he started researching the manta rays in Ningaloo in about 2003, and he runs a tourism operation in Coral Bay called Ningaloo Marine Interactions, as well as looking after the Coral Bay Research Station. But manta rays are still his major love, and so he's actually catalogued almost 1,200 individuals from that region, and over 5,000 sightings have been confirmed by photo ID. So his catalogue does focus around the Coral Bay Ningaloo Reef region, but it does stretch up into the Exmouth Gulf in the north and down into Shark Bay in the south, with a few sightings down there. Okay, so now I'll just give a little bit of an intro for my PhD. For my honours work, I looked into the food environment for reef manta rays at an aggregation site on the Great Barrier Reef. And I was able to establish a prey density threshold for manta rays feeding. And as Flossie mentioned at the beginning, during my PhD, I've been lucky enough to build upon this work with the Manta Trust in Henifara Bay in the Maldives. And so I guess what I'm really interested in is where manta rays are found and what habitat is important to them. So my PhD is exploring these themes from the fine scale, so such as their feeding aggregations, but right up to the global scale. So on the fine scale, I'm also investigating the importance of cleaning stations to the ecology of manta rays, and have found some really cool results about the role that the small cleaner wrasse play in driving manta ray cleaning station visitation. But today I thought I'd just give a brief introduction to one of my PhD chapters, which is looking at the more global scale of where manta rays are found. And it's actually investigating the connectivity and historical dispersal of manta rays using their unique belly patterns and frequencies of colour polymorphism. So this chapter really emerged due to my work with the sightings database. I think I spent too much time looking at spots, and I started to see patterns between different groups of animals. And this led me to hypothesize that manta ray spot patterns are potentially indicative of their relatedness to one another. And I started to wonder whether we could distinguish between animals from one population and another population purely by looking at their spot patterns and without the need to conduct further analyses like collecting genetic samples or anything. And I wondered if the global radiation of patterns in their colour morphology may hint at historical dispersal and connectivity in the species. So enter our global Manta Networks. I contacted Guy Stevens, who's one of my co-supervisors of my PhD and the co-founder of Manta Trust, and also Andrea Marshall from the Marine Megafauna Foundation. And I now have over 50 populations of manta rays to analyse globally, which amounts to over 17,000 individual rays, which is really cool. And through the use of machine learning and deep neural networks, I've been able to access an objective way of quantifying the individual manta rays patterns in order to analyse their relatedness in a meaningful way. Okay, so here's some initial output from a PCA, which is a principal components analysis of 22 reef manta ray populations. And it might look like a bit of a mess, but bear with me and I'll explain what's going on. So each small dot represents an individual manta ray, and each colour is a population of manta rays. So you can see the legend on the right there for which populations I've included in this analysis. And then the overlapping circles that you can see provide 99% confidence that each population falls within that grouping. So these early results show that almost 50% of the variation in the manta ray spot patterns is explained by the output of this PCA. And an Adonis, which is a statistical test that performs a multivariate analysis of variance, shows that populations are significantly different to one another with a p-value of less than 0.001. So in case you're not sure, that's actually really cool news. It's very significant. So this is basically a fancy way of saying that we can use manta rays' unique spot patterns to indicate their population origin. And this is only one of my preliminary findings, and there's more to come, but it's a really exciting first step. And in my subsequent analyses, I'm investigating regional trends in the data, as well as introducing variables such as latitude and longitude, sea surface temperature, all to help explain how these influence our results. So then moving on to the second part of this chapter, looking at manta polymorphism. So there's two main colour morphs for manta rays. Chevron on the left is the most common form, where we see the animal has a black back and mostly white belly. And then the melanistic colour morph on the right, where the animal is mostly black all over with some white patterning on the belly. And then there's the rarer leucistic form, where the animal displays a lack of melanism and ends up being quite light grey on the back and mostly white underneath. But this morph is actually scarcely recorded. So throughout global populations, we observe different frequencies of these colour morphs. And so one of the aims of my research is to try and understand what this means about historical dispersal of the species and connectivity between them. So my analysis is still in its early days, but we've catalogued about 13,500 individual reef manta rays across 25 populations, and have melanism rates ranging from 0% in some populations in the Indian Ocean and the Eastern Pacific to over 40% in some populations in the Western Pacific, such as New Caledonia and Fiji. So you can see from this map that the high melanism rates are centred around the Indo-Pacific region for reef manta rays. And for oceanic manta rays, we see a different trend. So here we have collated over 3,000 individuals from 23 populations, and we see rates ranging from 0% in parts of the Indian Ocean and Western Pacific up to around 30% in the Eastern Pacific in places like Costa Rica. And just to be clear, we do actually have data from manta populations in the Caribbean as well, but as this is a putative third species, I've left them out of these maps for the time being. One caveat here as well is that I'm not actually displaying the population sizes in these maps, and that information is likely to add a disproportionate weight to some populations, which will be accounted for in my subsequent analyses. But so these early results from my PhD actually leads us on to some other findings from our research here in Oz. So in this section of the talk, I'm going to go through a few small case studies of some of the cool discoveries that our group has made. Firstly, yes, pink manta rays do exist, or at least one does. So Inspector Clouseau was seen for the first time back in 2015 as a mature male by one of the staff at Lady Elliot Island. And when we received the photos, we were a little bit dubious, but the photographer is a very trusted dive instructor from the island, and he's contributed about 10% of our whole East Coast database. So we knew that it was the real thing. And then a year later, we were lucky enough to be on the island when the pink manta turned up. And one of our researchers, Amelia Armstrong, was able to acquire a tissue sample. And this is actually the skin plug from that tissue sample. So he truly is highlighter pink. This tissue sample has been used to rule out anomalies and structural changes in the tissue of the animal, and the persistence of the coloration and pattern over time has led us to rule out diet or infection as a cause of the colour expression. So our best theory is that this is simply a different expression of the melanism, so that's the skin pigment of the animal, and it's just likely the result of a rare genetic mutation. And don't get me wrong, we were always really excited about the pink manta. But then earlier this year, photographer Christian Lane released his eye-popping images of Inspector Clouseau, and suddenly the whole world was excited about the pink manta, which of course is great news for highlighting manta ray research in general. Okay, so moving on to our next case study, and this is from the other side of the country. So this is Whoopi. She's a large mature female from Coral Bay in Ningaloo Reef, and she's semi-resident in the bay for part of the year and really popular with the tourism operators. So in June 2015, she was observed with a boat strike injury with deep lacerations to her pectoral fin. And when photographed 45 days later, these had healed considerably, and within a year, they were 95% healed and the scar was unrecognisable as a propeller strike. So we're highlighting this because it just shows the incredible healing capacity of manta rays. But on the other hand, it also highlights that this healing capacity might be masking anthropogenic threats that face these animals. In Coral Bay, there is quite a bit of boat traffic seasonally, and the animals do use those surface waters for feeding and going about their various day-to-day activities. And so it's actually really important to show findings like this to help influence management to go slow zones or even critical areas protected from boat traffic. And then back to the East Coast now, for who I'm dubbing the grandfather of mantas. So meet Taurus. We think he's possibly the world's oldest known manta ray, although I'd love to hear if anyone knows of an older individual, and then we'll stop waving our hands about him. Taurus was first seen back in 1982 as a mature male, and he had visibly extended clasp as his reproductive organs at that stage, so he was likely at least 10 to 15 years of age. And then here's the latest sighting of him, happily enjoying the reef again in February this year. So we know he is at least in his late 40s, but potentially much older. And in all this time, he's only ever been seen at Lady Elliot Island, and it's over 40 times that he's been sighted. So we think he's maybe a little bit of a homebody there. And then my final case study is of the big wanderers of the East Coast. So meet Bruce. He's an immature male that had been sighted off North Stradbroke Island in southern Queensland about 20 times. And then Joey the Lips, a mature male that was seen in the southern Great Barrier Reef and also off North Stradbroke Island. And that was until June 2018, when we received photo ID confirmed sightings of both of these individual rays just south of Townsville at the wreck of the SS Yongala, a famous dive site. And this represents an 1,150 kilometre point-to-point movement and is the largest known distance covered by a reef manta ray. In fact, this finding almost doubles the previously documented movements for this species, which were in the region of 600 to 700 kilometres. And although this is just moving along the one coastline of one country, it does actually have a potential bearing on the management of this species, because it shows they're capable of moving distances that could actually represent a border crossing into a jurisdiction where they are afforded less protection than somewhere else. And then I thought I'd pose the question, what do these findings have in common? And it's something that I come back to time and time again, and I guess it's part of what I do, but the importance of citizen scientists. For the most part, all of these findings were only possible because of citizen science contributions. As I mentioned earlier, we're not able to conduct research around the whole of our coastline, and we really rely on the water users, on other water users, to gather information and share it with us to better understand in manta ray ecology and biology in these waters. And so this is where some people in the audience could potentially help us out. So if you have been fortunate to share the water with manta rays in Australia and have taken photos of them, we want them. If you've done it in other parts of the world, we can always direct them to the right place, or Manta Trust can as well. You can always email it into them and it'll get to where it needs to get to. But in Australian waters, we would love to have your manta ray photos. Well, maybe not all of them. So I took both of these photos, so I'm not being critical of somebody else, but preferably we would like your photos that are like the one on the left with the belly shot. So the belly region of the animal contains that unique spot pattern birthmark that allows us to track and monitor the populations. And you can submit the photos to us via Facebook or via email, and if the animal is a new one, then you get to name it. And then I'll just do a final little plug while I'm talking about citizen science about a new research initiative that a number of our team are involved in. It's called Leaf to Reef, and it's all about the biodiversity of Lady Elliot Island, which is one of our key manta ray research locations. We're going to be launching with all the details of this in the coming days, but the main takeaway message here is that citizen scientists are being invited to contribute to this exciting new project, which aims to establish a network of climate change refuges by researching and protecting critical habitats in the world's largest coral reef ecosystem, the Great Barrier Reef. So stay tuned to hear more about Leaf to Reef and keep an eye out for it. And with that, I'll just quickly acknowledge all our wonderful industry partners, our funders, supporters, without whom we'd not be able to do the research that we do. Thanks, and I guess I'll throw it back to you, Flossie, and see if there's any questions.
Awesome, thank you so much. That was so interesting, especially the spot pattern stuff. I had no idea about that.
It's so cool. It's such an exciting data set.
Yeah, so the mantas have distinct spot pattern differences between the different populations. Okay.
That is what we are seeing. That was the hypothesis, and I didn't know if I would be able to find a meaningful way to actually analyze it.
Yeah.
But then I was contacted by a software engineer that was wanting to design an algorithm to match manta ray bellies, basically. And so she came up with this incredible system using machine learning and deep neural networks. And I looked at the output of it, which was these embedding files, or these numbers associated with each image. And I thought, can I use that at a population level rather than an individual level? And so we worked on it together. And yeah, so far the output's looking really good.
Wow. So where do you get the spottiest manta rays?
I think Hawaii has super spotty mantas. Yeah. Yeah.
I think Guy told me one day, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. As I said, I've now got like 17,000 individuals that I've been looking at. So I see a lot more spots than I ever used to.
Oh my gosh, amazing. Okay, cool. Okay, we'll ask you something that we ask everyone. What are some of your most memorable experiences in the water with manta rays or double rays?
Oh, I think one of the most incredible ones was when I came over to Henifaru. It was actually before I was even conducting the research that I was doing there. I was on a liveaboard boat, and we went out in the bay a couple of days before our boat departed to go somewhere else. And there was this mad storm that just made the surface another world and made the underneath another world. And there was 60 cycloning mantas. And I don't think I've ever had anything close to that experience. It was just otherworldly. I didn't know where to look. I didn't know where one animal stopped and the next started and where I fit into it. It was, really surreal.
Amazing in there, especially when it rains as well and the water's like boiling and the raindrops are bouncing off the surface, and then you look under the water and it's just magic and you're like, why am I here? How did I get here?
I know, completely. I still pinch myself. It doesn't feel like it was a real on this planet experience.
Yeah. Have you got any plans to go back out to the Maldives?
Hopefully. I have been chatting with Guy because the work that we did there a few years ago, we didn't quite get as much data as we were hoping, and he's got a couple of students that are looking to build upon that kind of work in other ways as well. And so I'm in the mix chatting with them all. Fingers crossed I'll get to make it out there with them one day. I'm not too sure, but we do want to build upon that work that we started.
Okay, awesome. Hopefully see you there soon.
Yeah.
Right, we have some cool questions from the audience. Okay, we have one from Jess. Hi, Jess. Jess says, could you use the belly pattern of the pink manta to identify lineage?
I don't really think that you could, because it's one animal. I think it would be really quite difficult to. I mean, one of the things that I'm looking to do with these analyses, where I'm identifying populations by their spot patterns, is I'm looking to pull out the most representative animal from each population. So the one that sits kind of in the middle as the animal that is most likely to be seen in that population. And I guess then you could almost use that to compare to others. But I think there's probably too much variation at an individual level to be able to do that. I think when you're looking at big data sets, it's easier to make the generalizations than looking at the single animals.
Okay, cool. Thank you. We have another one about the spottiness stuff.
Yeah.
This is from Deb. She said, how could you explain the variability in spottiness within small populations, i.e. populations in the Maldives which have both very spotty and barely spotty at all manta rays?
Yeah, I think it might be difficult. So at the moment, we are looking at broad subpopulation groups. So the Maldives itself is just one big population that we're going to be inputting into this. we will see how that falls out, and then we may split it up regionally, because we know, there's certain areas where we don't observe movement between them, and so it doesn't make sense to lump them all in together. Yeah. Certainly on the East Coast, the population that I'm most familiar with, we see some mantas that have barely a spot and then some that have tons of spots. So that's why in that graph that I showed all the dots everywhere, it looks a bit chaos, is because there is a lot of individual variation. So once again, it's trying to find the average between those. And what the analysis is showing is that even though there is all that individual variation, it's still less variation within one population than it is with the population next to it. So each population has their own variations, but those differences are more in between them than amongst them.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Okay, good.
I'm especially thinking of Mr. Spotty in the Maldives, and I think Deborah's worked in the Maldives too, so she might know him, but yeah, he's so spotty. So
yeah, well, it will be interesting to see what I can actually do with the PCA that I showed. Is you can look at the individual spots and see what that animal looks like, so you can actually compare how they fall out and what they look like, so you can see how that grouping happens. And so yeah, it'll be interesting once I get down into that part of the analysis. It'll be interesting to see where we see those crossovers.
Yeah, it's super interesting research, and nice and different to anything else that's going on. All right, cool. Deb says thank you very much, and she can't wait to read your chapters or your articles.
Yeah, no, me too. I'm looking forward to writing it at some point.
Crossed. We have another one from Miriam actually, who said this is really cool, and when are you going to publish these results?
Good question. We are still in the analysis stage, so fingers crossed, I was hoping to have it out by the end of the year. Yeah, hopefully this year it will be out.
Yeah, okay, cool. We've got one from Matthew. Thanks, Matthew. So he said, thanks for a really interesting talk. With the rehealing rates of mantas being so fast, how can accurate anthropogenic impacts be measured?
It's a good question. So one of my PhD chapters is also looking at this. So this global collaboration, getting these 50 data sets together, I also had the question whether we can look at injuries at a regional scale to identify threatening processes that are affecting the animals. And things like that healing rate with whoopee and also Baba Ganoush in the Maldives, Matthew's a well-known manta from the Maldives that had a horrific propeller injury but has healed incredibly from it. It actually makes it really difficult to tell. And one of the outcomes of that publication looking at the rapid healing rate was that Fraser went back and he went through his database to see where he had identified all these injuries in the parts and attributed them to different things. And he realized, oh, okay, actually I've maybe missed a lot of potential vessel strikes here because I was seeing a healed animal. So yeah, it's a really tricky one.
Yeah, I actually read that article and I was thinking about a manta we had in the Maldives called Spork, who had a propeller injury, and actually he was called Spork before he got the propeller injury, but I thought it was quite a fitting name for him, unfortunately. But we watched him heal over the weeks that he came to Hanifaru, and at the end it looked like he'd been bitten by a shark, the way that the wounds were healed. So if we hadn't have seen him originally, we wouldn't have probably guessed that it was a propeller injury.
That's it. Yeah, Fraser had attributed, I think it was around 18% of injuries or something were shark, and then he suddenly went, oh, maybe not. So wow. Yeah, it does throw it into question and makes it quite difficult to be able to give solid numbers for helping, to get these go slow zones and things like that.
Okay, so we have another question about if you can't accurately measure these injuries, then how difficult is it to get protections and mitigate these impacts?
Well, I think I'm probably not the best person to answer that. I'm not working in that space very well. Flossie, you might be able to answer that better than me, working where you do in the Maldives. I mean, the protections that you guys have achieved in Hanifara is amazing. And yeah, I don't think I'm best placed to answer that question.
Yeah,
sorry.
I think in different places it's different, isn't it? In the Maldives, we've had boat strikes like on Baba Ganoush, and we want to get some speed limits put into place at all the manta aggregation sites. But it's going to be hard to regulate any of that because we only have one ranger boat in the whole of the Atoll Biosphere Reserve, and if anyone's going to stick to the rules, I don't know. And to get that passed through government is going to be a whole challenge on its own. So I think, if you can prove that a lot more mantas are being affected by boats or fishing line than previously thought, then that's going to help. But still a long way to go. And I imagine it's probably similar in most places.
Well, I know for Fraser in Ningaloo, so they have like whale shark legislation about how you can swim with whale sharks and rules around that, very, very strict guidelines. And he's been trying for a number of years to get the same thing in place for manta rays, but there isn't anything in place currently. But what he has found, because he's researched them for so long there and worked as a tourism operator, he knows what's in the best interest for both sides, because he wants to have a good experience for his tourists as well. And so they've kind of actually self-regulated their industry, where they've got a self-imposed guideline of how they do their manta ray activity, and it actually works quite well. He still does want to get it into legislation, but that kind of self-regulation where everybody wins anyway, it is I guess an intermediate step.
Yeah, I was actually in Coral Bay last year. It's amazing there. I had the most amazing month there.
Awesome.
And I was so impressed by how the tour operators do the manta swims and all the other swims, because they will only have sort of one boat of people in the water at once. You'll jump far ahead of the manta, so you're not jumping on the manta, you're not disturbing the manta, so you can't free dive until somebody says it's okay if the manta's really chilled out. So it's really impressive how they've all grouped together and formed this sustainable tourism, and it's obviously working.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. And Fraser's a huge driver of that. Like he has the information from his years of research and working there to be able to advise people what the best things to do are. So it's really good.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, we have a good one. Where was it? From here we go, Anita. So Anita says she's a student at Diponegoro University in Indonesia. Sorry if I pronounced that wrong. And she wanted to know if color polymorphism affects the manta ray survival rate.
So actually a paper came out about this last year from our colleagues at Marine Megafauna Foundation, and they found that there was no impact on survival with between the melanistic and the white colour morph. Yeah, they didn't find it to impact the survival rates of the animals. So yeah, I guess the hypothesis is that it would, because the chevron colour is the counter shading which you see in a lot of marine animals, gives them protection from above and protection from below. But yeah, no impact from their study.
Okay.
Yeah.
So lucky for the variant colours of mantas.
Yeah, exactly.
On the topic of colours, Ariana just wanted a recap on what causes the pink pigmentation. She said, is it similar to what happens with flamingos? Maybe you could just recap that.
No, so I believe with flamingos, that's more a factor of their diet. So they intake the krill or the minerals and everything, and that's how they get their colour. Whereas the pink manta ray, we actually believe it's a genetic mutation. So it's actually just a different form of the melanin, like the expression of the white or the expression of the black. The pink is just an excess in a certain part of the melanin that gives the pink expression. So we that's our current hypothesis, is that it is a genetic mutation rather than diet, infection, or anything like that.
Okay, cool, thank you. Right, I think we'll just have a couple more. So we have one from Amelia. She's asking if the lack of sightings data on the south coast is due to low tourism or the mantas not frequenting those areas. I think you maybe went over that.
So we believe that it's likely they are not found there. So when Amelia did that distribution map, that paper came out last year, updating their distribution around the full northern side of the coastline. She did scour all the government reports, all the aerial surveys, all internet blogs, everything, you know, going to all the fishing sites and everything to check where sightings would be. And I mean, there's quite a bit of fishing presence and everything in those southern waters, and as well as ocean goers, you know, for different reasons. So if there were animals found down there, there would at least be some recordings of them. We think it's colder water there. It is the Southern Ocean. So it's just beyond their thermal threshold, at least for reef manta rays. For the oceanic manta rays, there are a couple of sightings from down there, but we don't have many sightings. I think we have about 30 sightings of them from around the whole Australian coastline. So there are a couple of them down there, but not many. So they may be found down there in more offshore locations where boat traffic are not seeing them, but we doubt that the reef mantas are. If you look at their global distributions, they're not found at those really high latitudes.
Okay, cool, thanks. And is there much connectivity between the East Coast and the West Coast populations?
No connectivity. So between our sightings databases, we've seen zero overlap between the two populations. And Amelia Armstrong as well, who did that distribution map, she's also done population genetics during her PhD, and she's looked at structure between the coastlines, and they're clearly two different populations. Yeah.
That's cool. Okay, we have one more from Deb. Deb said, this might not be your area, but she's wondering if you see many juvenile mantas on the Great Barrier Reef.
We do. So we get recordings of mantas. You know, some people will give us size estimates and say that they're, you know, less than 2 meters or something like that. Depending who it's from, you always have to take it with a little bit of a grain of salt, because as we know ourselves, it's really difficult to size these animals without any reference. I've seen quite a few small mantas on the Great Barrier Reef. Further south, I have a few reliable citizen scientists that contribute sightings to us, and they seem to see them quite regularly. So down at the southern extent of their range, not in the Great Barrier Reef, so down into New South Wales, there's quite a few sightings proportionately to the number that we get of small individuals. And so I have a bit of a hypothesis that big pregnant females head down there and give birth, but I don't have anything to back that up. I want to have something. I'm working on it, but it's at the moment it's just here. So yeah, I've never seen a baby. I have had someone submit a video of what looked like a baby manta. It was behaving really funny the way that babies do. I've seen a baby on the west coast in Exmouth Gulf, but yeah, I haven't seen one. Like, this is from Lady Elliot, this video, and this is where we get a lot of our sightings from, and I haven't seen any baby ones there.
Okay, cool. She actually just said thanks, and she has an ID from a little one at Lizard Island that she's going to email you.
Thank you.
Little cutie.
And we have very few sightings from up there, Deb. So if you are going to submit that sighting, I can almost guarantee it will be a new one to our database, and you'll get to name it, because we have very few sightings from the northern Great Barrier Reef.
She just said she saw 3 in 1 week in October.
Awesome.
So I think
we just need the date and location.
Yeah, some cool information coming through. Okay, we have another question. I think we'll do this one and then one more, and then we'll end. This is from Eddie, who I believe works in Indonesia, and he's asking if you see any correlation on spot patterns between individuals in northwestern Australia and Komodo or Nusa Penida.
Good question, Eddie, and thank you for your photos. Yours are part of that picture that I put up before. So I haven't actually interrogated it at that level yet. We haven't seen any crossover between those animals in terms of IDs, but I will have a look at the spot patterns to see the similarities between those populations. We have uploaded all of our West Coast and East Coast populations to Manta Matcha, which is where the Indonesian populations of Komodo and Nusa Penida are kept. So we've uploaded our basic IDs onto there so that it can try and match individuals, and we've had nothing come back. We do have a number of poor quality images, so some of them wouldn't match in an algorithm anyway, but so far we haven't seen anything. So.
Okay. Yeah. Cool, thank you, and thanks to everyone for such good questions, and Asia for some such good answers. We've got one more which we've been asking everyone. What would be your book recommendation about the natural world? Anyone interested?
Oh yeah. Yeah, so you asked me this the other day and I felt a little bit stumped, but I actually just finished reading The Island of Sea Women by Lisa C. And it's about these incredible women divers off Jeju Island in South Korea. And it's so amazing the way she has captured their intimate relationship with the ocean and how much a part of it they are and it is of them. And so I only just finished reading that, so I'll recommend that one.
That's a good one. I want to read that one actually. I just watched the Patagonia film on them. Did you watch it?
No, I haven't, but you said that. I'd like to.
It's like a short film, I think maybe 10 or 15 minutes with Swimmy from Hawaii, I think is her name. But she goes out and visits them and she just talks to them about motherhood and their free diving, and it's a really nice film to check out.
Yeah, awesome.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much, Asia. I hope you enjoyed yourself.
Yeah, no, thanks, Flossie. It was great.
Yeah, I definitely learned a lot. You have so many projects going on, and it sounds like so many future projects as well. So I'm excited to see all of your findings.
Me too. Let's see how long this PhD takes.
Maybe it'll take as long as Fraser's.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks to everyone for watching and for some great questions today and comments and sharing photo IDs and all sorts of things like that. We have a few more webinars coming up. We have one on Monday at 10 a.m. That's with Jamie, who runs our Thailand project, and she is going to be talking about the manta rays of the Thai Andaman Sea. So you can tune into that one. We are starting registration for the webinars. They will still be free, but you just have to click on the link, as always, on the website, mantatrust.org/webinars, and click register and put in your name and email address. So it's really easy. As always, you can find out more about our webinars, about manta rays, devil rays on our website. We've got information of all the projects around the world studying manta rays on there. And you can support us and support manta research and conservation by signing up to the Cyclone. It's a members only hub where we share all of our latest research and research trips and interviews with different projects. And all the money raised will go towards manta research and conservation. Okay, I think that's it from me, and hope to see some of you on Monday. Thank you very much, Asia, again.
Thanks so much.
Have a great evening.
See you later, Flossie. Yeah, you have a nice day. Bye, everyone.